You've got Byron.
Yeah. I take the time as 7 o'clock. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Growth, Infrastructure and Resources Scrutiny meeting. As usual, may I remind you to mute unless you're addressing the item and to raise your virtual hand should you wish to speak at any point in the meeting. We have a lengthy agenda tonight, so in order to get through, I've put some approximate timings on the items. A lot of the questions have been raised about item 9, the Q4 outturn, so I envisage that this will take an hour. For items 10 and 12, I've allocated half an hour each as we have already had a briefing on the leisure needs analysis. And as a committee, we will be asking for updates on both contracts on a more regular basis than the scheduled meetings allow for. That being said, I do not want to stifle debate and I will be flexible to a point. To avoid being dragged into long arguments, there may be times where I will defer to officers and ask them to get back to you on specific points. We also have a deputation this evening and we need to appoint a vice chair, so the agenda is very full. If we get close to the finish time at 9:30, I will ask to take a vote on extending the meeting until 10 p.m, which is the absolute cut-off point. So the first item on the agenda, Joe, do we have any apologies?
No, we haven't this evening, Chair.
Okay. Record of the meeting. Can I have a proposer and seconder to approve the minutes of the meetings held on the 18th of February and the 29th of March? Mark, you and Nick as second.
Yep.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest this evening? No. Petitions, deputations and questions. I believe we have one deputation. Oh, sorry, Nick, you've got your hand up. Sorry.
I did. Sorry, it is a non-pecuniary and will not affect my ability to debate, but for the leisure contract, I am president of a local sports club.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have one deputation this evening from Mrs. Krellin, who Joe has just promoted to the panel. Good evening, Mrs. Krellin. You have 5 minutes in which to deliver your presentation, and there will be a further 5 minutes allowed for the committee to ask questions. So please, can you go ahead? Barbara, you're on mute.
I tried to stay quiet, sorry. Thank you very much indeed for allowing me the time just to speak to you about one of the agenda items you've got tonight. I'm Barbara Krellin. I'm a Rutland resident of approximately 40 years. I'm a retired primary head teacher. I've always been passionate about sport, physical activity, well-being and mental health. And I'm currently chairman of the Active Rutland LSA, the local sports alliance, and I've been involved with all of its predecessors. I've studied the report that you've got tabled of the Strategic Director for Places, Rita Capma's sports contract update, which you are studying and I believe taking a recommendation from Councillor Walters this evening. This response, and I have discussed it with Councillor Walters, this response is in the context that I've not seen the full consultant report nor the exempt papers mentioned. I ask, has RCC got a strategic vision for this important area in Rutland? I was part of another expensive consultation, which I believe cost in the region of £200,000, and nothing appeared to come of it. I actually had great hopes of the latest consultation, even though the consultant made no response to anything at all I said or suggested during the interview, namely, among other things, a local consortium managed via a service level agreement by RCC. It was by Zoom, but I had the impression that he was writing things down. Now I wonder, as nothing appears relevant to any of what I suggested. Prior to this, and this being the consultant, I sent an email to Lucy Stevenson and Oliver Hemsley, which Lucy used almost verbatim in her report to RCC in, I believe, January. In the email, I stressed how needs activities, etc. had changed due to COVID, and plans needed to take account of that, the change, and provide for future needs. The suggestion, that's the one I've pulled out of this evening's paper, the suggestion that RCC has only 2 options, as suggested in their report, horrifies me, and I find neither option acceptable. The first of mothballing above the second. I realise that this would cause public uproar, no less, however, than would occur when the public discover that with all the financial constraints as they are, RCC is continuing to support a near bankrupt business for the questionable benefit of the 2% and reducing of the population who actually use the facility. The 3-month break clause of option 2 is the only flicker of hope I see. It could be presented to the public that RCC are taking neither option, but actively investigating what I believe to be a viable, innovative option. This might also even meet the Sport England's criteria. Has anyone, including the consultant, investigated my suggestion with the council, providers, or the public? And if not, why not? Why is it not a viable option? I understand that Mary Hardwick made similar suggestions to mine to the consultant and has further outlined those in a recent document, which I believe you've all seen. I gave my response to all the points in the document that Councillor Walters forwarded to you, so I will not repeat them all. But in a nutshell, I would ask you to consider the final points in my email. What is the long-term vision, that is, say, 3 to 5 years of RCC? Has anyone explicitly created any mid-long-term visions? Has the consultant? If RCC don't have one, how will you respond if the current arrangement becomes unviable for any reason in the short or mid-term? Has the consultant or have the council considered exploring a flexible community delivery model stroke consortium as detailed in Mary Hardwick's document? If not, why not? I'm looking at the opportunities and threats in that same document. If you have, if yes, and it's considered non-tenable, what research or actions have you done with the community to reach this conclusion? If yes, and it's worth exploring, what are the next steps that you plan to take to validate it? If the current successful community offerings in sport and leisure work so well, why wouldn't RCC want to be seen to be part of the big picture in a CIC? In what context are the longer term decisions, this is directly from the document, going to be taken over the summer if only 2 options have been identified? I fully support Mary Hardwick's presented idea as it aligns with mine, and I firmly believe that here is another viable option, seemingly ignored, as I said, without having seen the full report, seemingly ignored by the recent consultant, and I think it deserves serious consideration. The population of Rutland deserves the best that RCC can give them, not by patching what we already have. I would urge you to take this option forward with both of our, that's Mary and my, support. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Crellin. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Gordon Brown, you've got your hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. Barbara, you mentioned a consultation that took place some time ago, costing £200,000, you thought. When did that take place?
I believe it was either as you or before you were responsible for the portfolio. I couldn't put my hand on the paperwork because, as I say, there's nothing obviously happened from that. It was a big review, went round all the clubs. I mean, Nick Beggy will probably remember the cricket club being talked to. Everybody was talked to, but nothing seemed to come of it.
That was the 2015 report, I believe, for the local plan.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Time flies. Sorry, Gordon.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions at all? No? Well, thank you very much. Joe, do we have any questions we noticed from members?
No, Chair. Sorry, no formal questions were received, but I know there were some questions raised at the pre-meet, so they'll be answered in the discussion.
Okay. And do we have any notices of motion from members?
No.
Okay. Consideration of any matter referred to the committee for a decision in relation to a calling of a decision.
No call-ins, chairs either.
Okay, so I go to item number 8, which is the appointment of vice chair of the committee. Do we have any nominations for a vice chair? Councillor Ainsley. You're on mute. You're on mute. Councillor Ainsley, you're still on mute.
Okay, I don't quite know what happened there. My humble apologies, everybody. I'd like to nominate for the 3rd time in my hearing, Councillor Oxley.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Waller and I saw your hand first. Do we have any other nominations at all? So congratulations, Councillor Oxley, you are vice chair. So if we go now to the substantive items on the agenda, which is a Q4 outturn finance management report. This is in the Cabinet Report number 66/2021 from our Section 151 officer, which we have been asked to comment on. Sav, I'll hand over to you for a brief introduction, and then I believe Karen, our portfolio holder for finance, will be answering some of the committee's questions, which we actually forwarded on by email after our pre-meet. So thank you, Sav. Karen, could you take the lead, please?
Chair, I have an introduction, if that's okay.
Yes,
Yep.
that's fine.
I'd just like to draw us back to the bigger picture and set some context for which the questions have been raised in. We were dealing with the pandemic all year in an extraordinary reactive environment. The government were making unforeseen and unannounced demands on RCC that had to be met, pushing other tasks to one side, making forward planning and budgeting extremely difficult and complex. RCC delivered business as usual and met the pandemic demand locally and to the government with very little increase in resourcing. The many grants received were used wisely and we ended up in a good position. Effective management of BAU and the pandemic over the year has to be absolutely commended against these difficult circumstances. We are declaring a £2.3 million surplus, which I think is a more positive story than declaring a negative situation, but much of that money is allocated. We are still facing some known pressures that have been incorporated into the MTFP and a list of unknown financial pressures that are as yet unquantified and could put us at risk. The impact of the outturn on the MTFP means that we're still drawing on reserves, but the council runs out of reserves a year later in 26-27 rather than 24-25 as originally predicted in the budget setting in February this year. I consider we are still at risk and need to continue to be prudent and make cost savings to replenish our reserves as soon as we possibly can. Closing the gap on the reserves will also be considered against the outcome of the future Rutland conversation and the formation of a new corporate plan. I just want you to note that we are not alone in the situation we are in. I would like to draw your attention to the Parliamentary Select Committee paper published by the Committee of Public Accounts. It's critical, very critical, of the role the MHCLG and its negative impact on local authority financial stability across the board. It makes 7 relevant conclusions and recommendations, but I know we're constrained for time tonight, so maybe that's the subject of another discussion. but it makes informative reading for members. It's entitled COVID-19 Local Government Finance, and I will forward you the link out shortly. On that note, I know we have a lot to cover this evening. So Chair, how would you like to progress with the questions?
Well, we actually gave a list, so could
Yeah.
you?
Do you want to run through the list?
Yeah, could you run through the list?
We
Or do
can.
I need to get it in front of you.
It's okay.
Which I haven't.
No, it's okay. So I've only received the answers. Sav, go.
Oh, Sav's got his hand up. Do you want to come in, Sav? Or?
Yes, I do. Sorry, there are 44 comments and questions which we've responded to. Can I ask whether members want us to go from 1 through to 44, or you wish to pick out ones which you think are more important than others? I don't think all of them have equal weighting, but I'm happy to go through 1 to 44 if members want to.
We've only got an hour, so I think we need to be use our time wisely. What do you think, panel? Can I have a response?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we were to have the key questions as Sav sees it, and then we can perhaps, if there are any which we feel we need to address, which he hasn't, then we could perhaps ask him then.
Councillor Waller, you've got your hand up.
Please, I'm not sure which are the key questions. So I wonder, Chairman, as you wrote a very good summary of what we thought, I felt after our pre-meet, that you might like to indicate to Sav the areas he responds to, and we get circulated with the detail.
Okay, while I bring that up, can you, Karen, start on the list while I'm looking for it, please?
Okay. Sorry, Sav.
No, I think it would be. I will make a. Can I make an overall comment first, and then we'll focus on the areas that the committee. You know, it's the committee's there to determine which questions it wants us to focus on, and that's what we should do. I'll just respond to the overall comment, which I note, which is that the panel still have concerns about the movement from Q3 to the outturn. I know that is the opening comment in the issue that we've had. I think when members know that outside of this meeting, we have discussed this already. And I have explained to members some of the significant challenges we faced during the pandemic, as indeed the portfolio holder has indicated, and the impact it's had. I think a key part of the underspend that we have relates to some of the vacancies that we've held, and a decision that we made early on to not bring additional resource in lots of areas. And there is no doubt in my mind that bringing in some extra resource may have helped closer management of the budget in some areas. So we've been running, for example, in finance with vacancies all year. If we hadn't run with vacancies, would we have been able to provide more support to budget managers? Yes, absolutely, we would have done. There's no doubt about that. But we made a decision early on, which I believe was supported by the then portfolio holder for finance, which was to try and cope with our existing resources where possible because of the massive uncertainty that existed. I believe that was the right decision at that time. Would I take the same decision again with the knowledge I have now? Possibly not. I think in finance in particular, I would have brought in some extra resource. Andrew, who is here tonight, has worked like a Trojan in the last year, and with all of the extra requirements placed on us from government, we have been very stretched, there's no doubt. So, I think that definitely has contributed to making budget management more challenging. But as I've said to members before, I believe as the Section 151 officer, we can make some improvements across the council in terms of the way we manage budgets, and that's what we will aim to do. But I've never worked in the difficult circumstances that we faced during the pandemic, and I prefer to focus on the very good position that we find ourselves in rather than the movement from Q3 to Q4, but I do note the comments made by the panel. Hopefully, Chair, that opening remark has given you a little bit of time to highlight the questions you might want me to focus on now.
Yeah, thank you, Sav. That's very generous of you. Really, I suppose what we're asking is what evidence there is that this on para 2.4, what evidence there is that this was a one-off. I mean, is this a new trend? Do we have any sort of like response on the first quarter's figures at all that would say this is a trend or not a trend?
It's too early to say, quite frankly. In both, I think the paragraph refers to adults and children's, which I appreciate are not the focus of this panel, but I will answer the question. It's too early to say. We're doing a piece of work now in both with the adults team in particular. We've had 100% rise in cases in the last month, from about 40 to 80. In some of our statutory services, we have got more people coming through the door. I'm getting some numbers around some of this, but obviously I don't have that necessarily tonight. But we have had more people coming through the door, so we actually have a waiting list ourselves for the first time in a while. Well, because of in terms of staff capacity, we can't deal with all of the requests that we're getting at the moment. What we are seeing in the cases we've looked at is they're more complicated. They're more complex than cases we normally have, which of course has a cost risk to it. We know obviously from previous announcements and updates that John Morley, the interim director, has given, that the GPs and hospitals are facing backlogs, and that will have a knock-on impact for us. When people eventually see a GP or go to the hospital and issues are identified and diagnosed, there could well, of course, be care packages that go on with that. There are also a couple of big care packages for people who currently exist outside of Rutland but are looking to move to Rutland, and we're actively looking to see how we can manage that. If they end up being in Rutland, that could be a six-figure impact on the budget. So we're doing a more detailed budget review at the moment because lots of variables are up in the air. We are working, finance are working with the adult social care team through the director to actually look at where we're at and to try and have a forward look. But we are a little bit still in crystal ball stage, I'm afraid. It's difficult to forecast in this area, but you know, I've asked the finance team to work with the adult social care team to have a bit of a dive into this and see what we can come up with. But you know, in terms of adults, it's we're still unsure as to what the future holds. In terms of children's, then I think we don't see children's as a higher risk as adults, actually. In my conversation with the interim director there, what we are seeing is more assessments. So in the first 2 months of the year, we've had 18 assessments we've completed compared to 13 at this time last year. And we are seeing a number of complex cases. So the complexity appears to be the same both in terms of adults and children. We've got a significantly greater number of care leavers than we've had previously, 34. And if that continues, that will present additional workload, but we're managing at the moment. But in terms of looked after children, the numbers have gone down from 45 last year to 31. And we are working hard to try and mitigate numbers coming through the door through the work we're doing in Edge of Care. So we haven't seen the spike of referrals we thought we might, and you know, when we came out of lockdown and schools went back, and issues may arise that may have been hidden with people being at home. So I think both in children's, we think the position is a bit more stable, and we don't see that as necessarily a high budget risk as it might have been in the past. Yeah, we've got to do more work on that because that position is fluid. I suppose one of the things, sorry, I forgot to say for adult social care is that the CCG discharge scheme that existed, which is about getting people out of hospital quicker, has meant that we haven't had to pick up costs historically that we would have done, and that saved us over £300,000. That scheme has broadly come to an end now, and so that as we try and discharge from hospital, we will start to pick up costs that we hadn't picked up in 2021. So we are doing a deep dive into the social care area. So I hope the underspend that we saw last year will continue. I have concerns about whether it will in adult social care. In children's, I feel a little more confident that the risk isn't as high.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gordon Brown, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I think let's go back to Sal's original points regarding the first paragraph of the questions, and that is I think we recognised incredible pressure on the officers last year, and not only that, we also in 3.23 we said that great work had been done by many departments, especially finance and resource. And I think the comment I would make is that I wouldn't expect all the pressure to fall on the finance department for ensuring the forecasting to be accurate. I would certainly want to see more information or more accurate information coming from the operational departments. You know, they, particularly senior people in there, should have a good feel for the direction of travel of costs. And that's the bit that worries me more than anything else. It's not the work that Sav and Andrew have done, which has been exemplary, but it's more in the actual departments. Have they got a grasp of their costs ongoing and the implications of that? And if they haven't, what do we need to do about it? Because I think, you know, the changes in numbers, particularly in that last quarter, in certain areas were quite dramatic. And I would have thought those departments should have realised those were coming and been able to give a heads up to not just yourselves, but the portfolio holders as well.
Councillor Paul Ainsley, you still have your hand up, is that?
No, that's a new one. Thank you. And I've
Okay.
unmuted. That's a real change, isn't it? I just wanted to really, Sam, if I could ask you the question, what has been the barrier to recruitment to assist you with the workload during these very difficult times? You mentioned right at the beginning of your conversation that
when the pandemic first started, we really didn't know how long things were going to go on for. I mean, so initially, out of the block, we didn't know what funding we might get, and we didn't know how long things were going to go on for. So if I had my time again, with 2020 hindsight, I'd have said to Andrew, with the extent of reporting that you're going to have to do all year, we need additional resource. But we didn't have that luxury. So we didn't know what was going to be expected of us over the year. And when we did get a better idea that things were going to carry on, we at that point, we were so knee deep in lots of the issues that, with respect to Andrew, if I'd have told him to get on and recruit, I think I would have sent him to hospital because he just didn't have the time. He was too busy doing returns to government to free himself up to do recruitment. And we did find ourselves in this catch-22 type situation. So that was the big issue. And at the start, and I go back to what I said, I remember talking to Councillor Brown at the time, and we just didn't know what funding we were going to get, how long the funding would go on for. We made what we thought at that time, and I still think it was the right decision at that time, to try and do the best we could with the resource we had, very conscious of the financial position that we find ourselves in. But as I said, if I look back in hindsight, I may have made one or two decisions differently. I'll give you an example, and it's about business grants. With business grants, by the end of the year, the government had given us £500,000 in new burden funding. So they'd said to us, effectively, their judgment was for us to run the grant scheme that we ran, they were giving us £500,000 to do it. I didn't know at the start of the year how much money we were going to get. By the end of the year, we'd got £500,000. Andrea used £6,000 of that, and I brought no extra staff in. So her team did the equivalent of what government funded us £500,000, and we spent £6,000 of it. I'm going to be honest, I feel a bit guilty about that. because that team have worked like nothing else, quite frankly. The stress, they've been under working weekends and all sorts of stuff. Part of me regrets that decision now, but I didn't know. I didn't know how long it would go on for. I didn't know the amount of money that they would give. I wouldn't make the same decision again with hindsight, but at the time, we just didn't know. When the first new burdens funding dropped for the grants, I think it was something like October. So we were like 6 or 7 months in. So if I'd have gone out and got 3 extra staff in at the cost of 100 grand, rightly, I think that, Councillor Brown at the time would have said to me, well, what we're doing, Sav, we're getting no money from government. We might have said that. I'd have said it myself, actually. So that was the challenge. It wasn't people saying to us, you can't recruit. It was just, how long do things go on for? And the requirements have ramped up, in business grants in particular. The requirements have just ramped up all through the year. Now we're having to provide information to HMRC. The government didn't tell us that it would require us to do lots of assurance work, which has now come out the woodwork. Like so 9 months after we started operating grants, we were asked to provide assurance that the first grants we gave out in April were correct 9 months after. So, sorry, I'm going on too much with my answer, but I think you get the idea. It was extraordinary circumstances that I wouldn't want to work in again, quite frankly.
Okay, so Sam, thank you very much for that detailed response. What I'd like to ask is, given the benefit of hindsight, given the amount of pressures that you find yourself on within the department, and given we now have a budget surplus, are you reconsidering your decision not to recruit extra staff at this point to actually, because what I'm concerned about is these swings, which do worry me. If it'd been the other way, if we'd had a huge deficit as opposed to a monstrous surplus. So I'm thinking in the very best of intentions here, and it's not to criticise in any way, shape or form, but whether you in fact have reconsidered recruitment again now in the light of your experience and the surplus.
In terms of grants, then I don't think, because we're coming out the other end of it, I don't see the grant schemes continuing substantially. I think the time to have the additional resources now passed. So although I regret the decision we may have made, with hindsight, I certainly don't think it's the time to bring in additional resource now. And I know that Andrea agrees with me on that one. In terms of finance resource, then obviously we are committed to making the saving that we've put forward. And again, I hope the worst of it has passed. So again, I don't, we are keeping a watch on resources. I've asked the government for, both in terms of grants and finance, I've asked the government for a calendar of activity that goes on to the end of the financial year 21-22 to say what are we going to be expected to do over the next year. The response I've had to that is, that's a great idea, we'll have a think. So I don't really feel like we want to push the button to bring in additional resource at this moment in time. I think certainly in the areas that I look after, that moment has passed. But we do need to keep things under review. If things change again, then I will be prepared to ask for more resource if I think it's needed. I'm certainly a bit wiser to that.
Okay, thank you. Very, very quickly, will we be getting a written response to all the detailed questions?
Yes, you'll get a response.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So thank you very much for your patience.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I would like to make an observation, first of all, and that is that I absolutely sympathise with Sav, Andrew and all their colleagues. This last year, everything was on the hoof and you couldn't plan for it properly. But I think with going forward with what will be new ways of working, our senior management at least needs to have some space to think. And that may require additional staffing, particularly in some areas. For example, we've not had a deputy director in places for a year. and that can't give our director time to do the strategic thinking she needs to. So I hope some of this, what seems to be surplus money, we do use wisely in recruitment, even if we are recruiting on a 2 or 3 year contract basis. That's my observation. But having said that, I'm going to appear to contradict myself now, because I would like some more information about the pressures going forward. Totally comprehended what Sav said about the demand-led budgets. It is very difficult to tell in social care, either adult or children. But some of the pressures I really couldn't quite grasp. For example, a service manager for safeguarding as an additional pressure. Well, we've had safeguarding responsibilities for a very long time and have had people managing safeguarding. So why do we suddenly need a 62,000 a year post? I know it's the right level of money for that sort of job, but why do we suddenly need additional in that? That's sort of one area. And again, on the going forward IT costs for home working, well, have we not provided people with the IT equipment that they need? And why are we needing a lot of extra mobile phones? Because I thought that you could ring the phone number that's published for us for staff and it got directed to them through their laptops now. So things like that are really not clear to me why we've got spending pressures going forward. So a bit more explanation from the service managers, I suspect, Sav, not from your team on that, I would find helpful. And finally, the service pressure for maternity leave, 148,000. My question is simple. Can we not have insurance cover to cover these eventualities? In other words, as part of our standard council insurance? And that's all I want to ask on this. Thank you, Chairman, or comment.
I don't know whether Sav can answer that or whether you'd like to come back in a written response later. Because this wasn't a question that was asked in the list that we sent over.
No, apologies for that, but I got my papers very late and the only space I had to look through them was today. I didn't get them till Monday night and I'd already committed to Tuesday and Wednesday this week.
Okay, so you'd be happy with a written response with that, because I think it's a bit unfair to be the who. Going forward, there's a question on Appendix H, the overall reserves becoming too large with earmarked reserves at 10.3 million, of which we only plan to use 2.1 million in the current year, and general reserves are 11.5 million, given an overall reserve of 52% of expenditure. We criticise parish councils for high reserves. How does this compare to other authorities, especially utilities? I can't say the word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Where are I? Yeah. Well, but before I answer the question, can I ask what the view of the committee is? Do you think our reserve balances are too high? Does it worry you? Let me ask you the question first before I give my view.
Would somebody like to answer that? Councillor Brown. You're on mute.
Be careful tonight. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I think position is that at 21.8 million, 22 million pounds against expenditure of 40 million. I'm just saying, is that right? We've added quite a bit to the reserves at the end of this, at the year end there, both in general and in earmark reserves. I look at them and just question whether they are all still valid in relation to the risks we run. You know, we've got general reserves for the general risk, and then we've got very large earmark reserves right across the board, particularly in adult social care. We seem to be mounting up reserves all over the place in terms of the reserve we already had, the extra 1% social care precept that go in there this year, the additional money in terms of the management requirement. I was looking for that. There's 270,000, I think, in that. You know, we seem to be adding to it. And I'm just wondering what the additional pressures are that justify having those in the short term, as against, you know, even the longer term. Do we really need them? And are we just building up reserves just in case it's going to be a rainy day?
Yeah, well, I think what I would say to that is that members are very much aware that obviously we've had a boost because we've got 2.4 million in particular in addition in our general fund reserve this year. What I would say is, given that the MTFP shows that we continue to approve budgets, we've approved a budget that involves dipping into reserves to the tune of £2 million. The projections moving forward show that gap will continue to £3 million. I would say, whilst we have got a medium-term financial plan that says we're 2 to 3 million out of sync, we probably need the reserves that we've got. That's the reality of it. Clearly, if we didn't have a financial gap to that magnitude, I think we would be looking at the reserves in a more positive way. We'd be saying, what can we do with the community on a one-off basis or otherwise to invest in our community and do something with those reserves? But whilst we have a deficit of between £2 and £3 million, whilst we face significant uncertainty and significant risks, then I think we find ourselves in a good position in terms of the reserve balance we've got. The budget report gives comparative figures. So if you look at section 3 of the budget report, it does give comparative figures, and we do have above average reserves relative to other unitary authorities. That information is reported in the budget. But I would say, given the fact that we are looking at a 2 to 3 million deficit in the MTFP, I'd say those reserves are going to run out pretty quickly, and I think I'm glad we've got them. I think the other factor that we have to build into some of this is, you know, our MTFP makes assumptions about decisions around council tax, it makes assumptions around the pay award. So the pay award, for example, we assumed would be a pay freeze this year. It still not settled, but it might be 1.5%. That would cost us 150 grand this year, and of course 150 grand every year. That's not accounted for in the MTFP. So over a 5-year period, you're looking at nearly £1 million there gone off the reserve just like that. So I'd say, thank goodness we've got the reserve level we have. I think the other factor you have to consider is, how easy is it going to be to save the £2 or £3 million that we need to save? If you sit there and think it's going to be very easy, Sav, we can do it really easily, then we probably don't need the level of reserves we've got. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult than what we think. And therefore, I'm pleased that we've got the reserves to give us the time. Councillor Waller alluded to a point a moment ago, which I do agree with and support, which is for us to address some of the issues that we have at the council, or to progress some of the initiatives we want to progress and some of the projects, we will need to bring in additional capacity. One of the things that somebody said to me today, or noted, in the council, when you're involved in doing big project work, it tends to be the same people sitting around the table on every project. That's not great, because it really says something about the capacity that we have. So I do think, and I think it is one of the questions in your set, to say that yes, the adult social care reserve is being built up, but we could decide to deploy that differently and support some of the project work that we've got to deliver to give us that extra capacity. So, you know, I, for one, I'm pleased as the 151 officer that we've got the reserve balance we have. I think when you're projecting a deficit of the size that we are, you need time.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Oxley, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, just following on from that, when I was first elected, we had reserves of 2.5 million. And that was in 2003. So we've certainly come a long way since then, but it's taken a lot to build up those reserves. And whilst I take on board what Sav says, so I would suggest that perhaps if we had not as much in reserve carried forward, that would help our present position. So we are between a rock and a hard place. But I just thought I'd make a point that it's taken a long time to build up those reserves.
Can I ask a question on the back of that, please? Can the committee give me a steer for 21-22 budget? Would you like us to underspend it, or do you want us to spend it in full? Would you make you feel better if we spend the money, or should we be trying? I'm telling people, try and be prudent, try and do what you can, try not to spend money. If you'd like me to give a different message that says spend the budget you're given, then I can.
Well, coming back on that, I think we have reached the point where we are now by being very prudent, and that should continue because of all of the uncertainties we have in the future. And I just wanted to make that point about the fact that we have in the past we have been very successful in building a strong foundation on which to build.
Sorry, I'm still not clear what that means, to be honest. Sorry, I'm just trying to be clear from my own point of view. What does success look like in the scrutiny panels in terms of the budget?
I'll answer that.
Please, if somebody could.
As the chairman has invited me to speak, thank you, Chairman. I would like the budget that is set in the first place to be a realistic budget, that it's set according to what we think we need to spend on the various services that we either have to deliver or choose to deliver. And on that basis, then, at the end of the year, we will come pretty close to the budget that we set. And I have in the past had arguments with officers on that very topic, because there is a feeling that a lot of our budgets are demand-led and that we can't predict for those. And I argue that, yes, you can if you use your data well. And we go round in circles. But I think it's actually important for our residents to say to them, you ask us to deliver these services, or we are delivering on the back of what you've said to us, and the big conversation helps us in that. It's going to cost us X to deliver it. But if it costs us X minus rather a lot of money, then I think we're open to accusations of not really knowing what we're doing. And one of the things I had in mind, although I didn't say when I mentioned the needing to invest, I think some of it might be training service managers in how to actually set budgets, because I'm not sure that all of them would necessarily have learned that in the course of their promotions through the council or councils they work for, because service managers tend to get promoted on the basis of the service in which they are clearly experts, rather than on the budget side of things. It's the old idea of a head teacher not knowing how to manage the finances, because they were an outstanding teacher in the first place. So I don't know whether that helps, Sav, but that is where I tend to be thinking in this. Having said that, before you come back at me and say this has been a difficult year, it would have been impossible to get it right in this last year, and probably will for the forthcoming year, because there are still so many uncertainties around COVID. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gordon-Brown, you have your hand up.
In answer to your question, Sav, I'd hope that we could beat the budget, because we already identified savings that should beat the budget anyway. So that would be my expectation, and I'd certainly hope that we continue to keep pressures on all areas, particularly in the large spending areas of adults and children's, where these are the largest areas, and we're seeing the least area of cost reduction. And so, in answer to your question, we should be beating the budget, not in all other circumstances being equal.
Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Chair. Sam, I think it's a little unfair to pose a question of the committee without any due notice, especially one of such magnitude. I take that in the spirit it's intended. It's not supposed to be a criticism in actual fact. I consistently hear that officers are under pressure due to workloads, extreme pressure due to workloads, and I would hope that we maintain our prudent approach with the budget, but that perhaps we lend a more sympathetic and reasoned ear to requests for additional resources where they are. I still think we need to apply due diligence. I'm not saying let's have a free-for-all, but I do feel from my own personal perspective that might be a reasonable suggestion, if only to relieve departmental pressures. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions on this subject at all? Are we happy for the questions that have been given to Karen and Sav to be answered, appended to the minutes, or do you want to ask any more specifically tonight? Councillor Brown?
There is just one. We've talked all through this about what's happened last year and what the impacts are for next year. The one area that we haven't discussed is the future funding from government, which has a major impact on us. We had the opportunity to have a seat at the table and just wondered what action the Cabinet's taking to make sure that we have that seat and that our voice is very much heard in relation to Rutland's somewhat perilous position.
Would you like me to take that, Chair?
Yes, please.
So yes, I mean, Gordon and I actually met with Luke Hall back in January of this year, and we got the promise of a seat at the table, and Alicia is very much aware of that requirement. And a week on Wednesday, I am meeting Luke Hall again at the Unitary Council Network, and I have made my views very plain on funding requirements, and I have will make sure I follow up on that. We will continue to keep pressure on there, and so is our MP. So it hasn't slid by, and obviously we will take the relevant people with us to make sure we get a good representation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on this subject? No, I can't see any hands up. Now, normally we would actually go to the waste strategy, but Lucy is not here yet. She had another meeting. So if we could actually change the agenda around, if we could go to item number 12, which is the Catmas Sports contract. I don't think at this stage we need to go into a separate meeting. It just seems all councillors on here, but maybe be a little bit careful in the fact that we don't discuss anything that might be exempt, any figures, etc. So could I go over to you, Councillor Waters?
Yeah, so you have the papers in front of you, and I know you've already had some discussions on them. It's important to note that this is looking for a short-term solution, and whether this scrutiny panel would like to give us any advice on whether it feels it is a reasonable thing to do to follow through with this short-term solution in supporting SLL. Obviously, I would like to take all your comments on board, but I would say I myself am only prepared to propose this if there is not a penny more, it is only for 2 years, and there is a 3-month break clause, so that we can consider the longer term options and not be held to this necessarily for the whole of 2 years, and certainly not beyond it. So I'll leave it there and take your questions and comments.
Councillor Beggy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions, which maybe if I just scoot through them in one go, and then we can wrap up responses at the end. Apologies if I look at the screen because my questions are on this screen, so if I'm looking away. Question one, in terms of the grant funding, if we accepted this and passed to SLL and they cease to trade, is this lost? Are we liable? Are there any terms connected to that grant money? Point two, what terms have we put on the additional 43,000? Will we be seen as a creditor if they cease to trade and have some chance of a pence in the pound reimbursement? Is there a requirement to pay back this money when they reach an agreed position of stability, or is it a free handout? Point three, in terms of maintenance, who has specified what works are required? If SLL has been independent, if it was SLL, has this been independently verified, and who will contract that work? Fourth point, with cost pressures and staff being a large cost pressure, if reopen, what assurance do we have from SLL that a similar pre-COVID level of service will be delivered? Do they have quantifiable KPIs? Will these change? How are they monitored? They are in essence the face of RCC in that legislative facility. Question 6, in 2.5 says there are only 2 options. How were the following evaluated and rejected? Finding a new partner, run by RCC, run by the college, or you could put a further option in, run by the community, as Barbara put forward. With reference to 7.6, they're asking financial support, but as we are saying, we are looking to put more cost onto SLL. How does this impact the financial requirements for SLL, or are they aware of this and it's factored into the funds offered? I've got a few more, but I can come back to those later.
Yeah, to be honest, Nick, and to be absolutely fair, having those written out would have been much nicer, because there's no way I've written down all those questions to give you an answer. In terms of the grant funding, I'll defer to officers on any conditions on the grant funding. In terms of the money that we're being requested to support SLL with, that is not all to be forwarded at one time. It's to be forwarded as and when, and they have agreed to have an open book policy with us so that we can monitor both the usage of the hall, that they're meeting their commitments, and that they are genuinely in need of the funding. So I hope that goes some way towards answering that one. In terms of if they were to go bankrupt, I would hope that as a large organisation they wouldn't, but we should only be giving them the money as they need it on a monthly basis, not all up front. Different ways of working, Catmas College will not, and they say they cannot, manage community use of any of that provision, and I quite understand that. In terms of community use, the equipment all belongs to SLL. So even if you go there for badminton, SLL own the equipment and put it out for the badminton club. So if you were to say no to SLL, will the community do it? Then you have no community, you have no equipment to do it with. That's why we're looking for a short-term solution while we look for a longer-term solution. And I apologise for having not written down every question you just asked me.
I will forward them to you, Alan, because I've got there's several more, but obviously we don't want to go through them all tonight. I will send them through and copy them to the panel.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions on this call? Councillor Brown. You're on mute.
Question about other costs that might be incurred. In paragraph 2.6, you talk about the maintenance costs, the preventive maintenance liable to SLL, but other preventive maintenance costs to avoid floodation the site is undertaken. Is that budgeted for, or is this another pressure that we're liable for? first of all. You also mentioned earlier, and I think Robin mentioned, as Sir Smith mentioned earlier, a condition survey of the site, and then move on. And could that be made available to the committee? And then finally, we asked for information about the work of the project board as a scrutiny panel following our last cancelled meeting, because we didn't have anything to talk about last time. And we expected to see more information about this to give us an idea of what is happening, both in the short and longer term, about the project. Why wasn't that forthcoming? Is there a reason for that? It is the duty of the scrutiny committee to look at these things, and they have asked for it. Why was it not forthcoming?
I'll make a start on that, if I may. It was an independent survey, and I'm happy to forward that to the panel or to all members, whichever you prefer me to do it. In terms of the leisure project, what do you think has happened that you don't know about?
Well, exactly, we don't know because we don't know. If you
You've
don't know, how do you know what you don't know?
You've had the briefing, that is it. So my comment to you,
you're putting me in a very difficult position. You well know, and I'm
my
not.
comment, Councillor Brown, before that presentation was that we're making the presentation to invite scrutiny to let us know how they would like to be involved in taking the project forwards. So I'm happy for scrutiny to let me know how they want to be involved, because we have only got as far as the needs analysis, as Penny clearly explained to you. And I said to you right at the start, I want you to be involved. So I'm not sure what it is that you want us to tell you has happened, if nothing has happened other than the needs analysis.
You put me in a very different position, Ellen. I'm not prepared to answer that question.
I have Councillor Oxley's hand up and also Penny's hand up. Penny, is your comment, are you replying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you go first, Penny, please?
If I may just add to that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the discussion we had about information was and the agenda for scrutiny was to provide a briefing, as we've had earlier this evening, and then this short-term option paper to be on the agenda. I'm happy to circulate to the committee the milestone plan that we're currently working to on the leisure review, and that, as I mentioned earlier this evening, sets out the clear stages of the overall process and the gateway stages at which we would be seeking to engage scrutiny at all of those key decision points. So that will be around the options, that will be around determining what the sort of future offer should look like, and then ultimately any sort of commissioning specification that we would as a council would look to take out to the market if that is where we ultimately end up. So I'm happy to circulate that milestone plan and on the understanding that we are on track for this long-term project that takes us through to 2023.
If Gordon would like to email me what he means, then I'll look at it. Clearly, we've had discussions with Catmus, but some of those I certainly won't mention in public.
I will certainly email you with the key points. Going back to my first question, which is do we have other pressures that are not in this document, further maintenance pressures that are not identified? Because we're rather vague in these remarks.
Yeah, there is always that risk, our intention is exactly the opposite, and to do the minimum necessary to keep it fit for purpose and running in the short term, and to negotiate hard as to who should be making the payments. Hard but fairly.
Although there is a limit, is there not, of £3,000?
For an individual item, yes.
Yeah, for any capital items.
Yeah.
Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I wanted to come back to the situation we were in yesterday when we had the pre-meet. And one thing which came out very clearly was it was difficult for us to actually assess the need of the wider community without seeing the presentation. So the presentation we were given this evening told us that there are 11,000 known users and 2,500 members, but it didn't actually, that actually didn't go into any detail as to how many people are using the dry areas and how many people are using the pool. Because I think the critical element really in all this is the huge amount it's costing for the pool. So is that something that perhaps the portfolio holder could answer?
Yeah, I think you're right. And the important element to me is 2,500 members or regular users rather than the 11,000 figure. I did supply the figures earlier today to the chairman, but that's only very, very recently been sent out. And I'm sure that those can be made available. Someone might be able to put them on screen or might not as to who's used it. How many people used the pool in the 2 years prior to COVID?
Yeah, because I mean that is sorry, carry on.
No, I think there again, it isn't a criticism, but I know the chair was slightly miffed when I said, why didn't I get these questions earlier? I didn't mean any offence, but if we'd had the questions earlier, if you'd had your pre-meet earlier and we'd known what you wanted to know, you'd have got the answers earlier. That's all I'll say. It's no good shaking your head, Gordon, because it's a fact, isn't it? If I don't get the questions until I'm in the middle of a quarry the night before or the day before the meeting, you won't necessarily all get the answers very quickly.
Well, I just wanted to make the point. It would have been helpful if we had been given a little bit more information in the report that we could look at prior to this meeting. That's all.
Yeah, I think there's two elements to it, isn't there? There's the need, and we're looking at that in the long term. And dare I say this in a public meeting, there's the public position or the political position with a very small p. Do we actually want to be the council that says, well, it looks on balance financially the same either way, but no, we're not going to do this. We're going to make the staff redundant and close that facility. And I think we have to take that into consideration as well. But I appreciate your point in terms of scrutinising the detail. You do actually need those figures. So they are available.
Okay. I'm not sure who had their hand up first, so can I go to you, Councillor Beggy, and then Councillor Waller, and then Councillor Ainsley?
It certainly wasn't me. I was last on the list. It was either Paul or Gail. I don't want to queue jump.
Let's go ladies first then. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chairman. I think in part to answer Councillor Walter's question, I can't speak for this committee as a whole, but from a personal point of view, I would like to have the information sooner and be able to interrogate it. Because even the 2,000 odd members that we were told about tonight, how often do they actually participate? What do they use it for? Could that be provided elsewhere, even within Oakham, let alone within Rutland? All these questions I would want answered before I could make anything like a sensible judgment on any of these things. And it may be that as a panel, we need to have, rather than try and do it in the constraints of a meeting, have a half a day of investigating the whole kit and caboodle around sport and explore further the sorts of ideas that Mrs. Krellin presented to us at the beginning and so forth, so that we can do a balanced view. because on the face of it, we have put an awful lot of money into this sports centre. We are being asked, into Stevenage Leisure, we are being asked to put an awful lot more in for the benefit of a few residents in Oakham. And I know that sounds pejorative, and I don't mean it to be, but we are here for the whole of Rutland. And whilst people who live in Ketton, for example, may feel that their needs are well and truly met by the sports club in Ketton and the swimming pool in Stamford, we've got to make sure that everybody else is equally content. And besides, why are we spending any money on sport at all? We've not actually talked about that question. Should we be providing for people on a universal basis, or should we take the approach we did with youth services some years ago and only provide according to need? So as a member of this committee, I would like the opportunity to thrash out all those issues. I'm not trying to say, I think, one way or the other, but I do have a specific question for the portfolio holder, and it refers to paragraph 6.2. The capital expenditure, it's talking about taking out section 106. Section 106 money, which has been generated within the parishes of Oakham and Barleythorpe. Have the respective parish councils been consulted as to whether they are supportive of this use of the money?
Unless Penny advises me otherwise, I'm going to say no.
Then I think that is a pity.
I do have an activity breakdown in actuals for April 19 to March 20, which has been forwarded on to me. Obviously, I've had a busy afternoon, and we've also been, we've had the pre-meet as well. The fitness gym activities in that date were 57,666. Group workout was 48,112. Outdoor activities 289. Sports hall activities 6,262. Swimming lessons 14,960, and swimming activities 19,712.
Thank you, Chairman, and I think that rather illustrates my point. That raises more questions than it answers, and I'm not criticising you on that, but it does rather, I think, underline the point I made at the beginning, that we need more time than you can have in one of these meetings to discuss. And I'm sure others will agree with me on that from other comments that have been made in our pre-meeting.
Yeah, and activity breakdowns, fitness 10,262, group workout, group workout 7,333. This is April 20 to March 21. Sports hall 991, swimming lessons 3,941, and swimming activities 2,531. So I suppose the gym and fitness activities on both breakdowns seem to be the highest, but I do agree with you, Councillor Waller, that really we needed this information a lot sooner, rather, so that we could have made more of tonight's meeting. Councillor Ainsley, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. I feel that we have very little choice but to support the additional funding, and I'd really like to turn to the issues surrounding the involvement with the further planning. And I welcome Penny's words saying that we're going to be involved at each milestone plan and the gateways, but I do feel that, and I agree with Councillor Waller on this, that we should actually be making a much closer involvement during the stages of development. And so I'm not sure how that might work, or that's something we can discuss, but I do feel that we need to get involved. And again, Councillor Waller, I'm sorry, I've done this twice now, I'm actually supporting what you said during the presentation, when you said that you were disappointed with that presentation, and there didn't seem to be an overall overall view of all the facilities that were available, including those with parish councils, etc., etc. So I think an audit of the existing facilities would have been exceptionally useful. So therefore, I feel that we should bite the hand of Councillor Walters and say, yes, we would, and I can't speak for everybody, but we should have much closer involvement with the decision-making process rather than being notified at the gateway stage. Thank you.
Anyone, sorry, Chair, anyone who knows me from adults and health and the wellbeing contract will know that my way of working is not to bring a finished product to you and ask you to criticise it. I would much rather that everyone was involved. It's unfortunate that we are left in the short term with a quick decision we have to make, and we are being held to that date by SLL.
Yeah, precisely. I would still like, yes, we've got to put a sticking plaster over the solution that we currently hold, and therefore, and we do have to look at the longer term view, and I think councillor involvement would be most useful. How that's going to be achieved, I don't know right now, but we should look at that.
Penny, you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I was simply going to reiterate the point that Councillor Walters has just made, that this is very specifically about a short-term issue that we need to address, that will give us the time to be able to work through all of the questions and the queries that you're raising, and to come up with a sort of longer-term comprehensive offer for the county. So this is very much about that short-term temporary solution, and just to provide assurance, some of the questions that Councillor Beggy asked earlier, that what SLL are asking for is us to underwrite the financial risk. So that is on an open book basis and paid for in arrears on presentation of invoice, and that is very heavily scrutinised by Andrew Merry and the finance team before we pay out any money. So I just provide that assurance that this is very much about the short-term solution, and we really do need to consider all the different parameters around playing into what our longer-term option looks like for leisure provision in the county.
Councillor Beggy, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I'm quite reassured with what Penny said actually about the payment of invoice, etc., which does answer a lot of my questions. But and I also agree with Gail and Paul that we have very little option but to accept option 2. My point is, and I don't know if Gail was alluding to this as well, and I'll be interested from the portfolio holder, whether or not you're wholly satisfied with the report given by the consultant. I found it quite high level. It seemed to be some basic desk research, which a lot of that could have been done internally. A lot of that is just simply data manipulation. I saw little from it which was actionable or drove much insight. If I'd have seen that report in my role as a marketing director coming back to me from a consultant or agency, I would have felt let down and asked them to revisit and come back with a lot more depth and a lot more insight. So I'd be interested in your thoughts and whether or not we're going to ask more from that consultant, and try to understand how that consultant was selected in the first place. What, as I mentioned earlier, what were the terms of reference, and ultimately, and this can be done privately, what the cost of that consultant's work was.
Yeah, I won't give the... No, I'd rather come in first if you don't mind. I certainly won't talk about costs in public session. I'm satisfied that the consultant met the brief, which was the words that I used. I think it was Gail that asked the question at the end of the actual briefing. I could be wrong. Did that brief ask for any information about field sports, for example? No, it did not. In fact, it specifically said no work is required in regard to field sports. So the consultant has done as asked. On reflection, bearing in mind that we're looking for a long-term overall strategy, Should we have asked for something different? I leave that for you to decide. I believe that the presentation was 5,000% better than the first one I saw, which was very much based around Catmus and Catmus only and leisure centres. And I think he's done a good job in morphing his presentation and taking into account the wider view, which is what I asked to happen after I'd seen the first presentation.
So just a supplementary then, Alan. So you're happy that is a robust and actionable report?
No, I think it's a starting point.
Okay, so can I ask what the next stages are?
I'm hoping that scrutiny will become more heavily involved in helping me drive forward a strategy for leisure for Rutland. I know you look frustrated, Nick.
Penny, would you like
I
to
am,
come in
because
now?
that report doesn't seem to have told us anything particularly that we couldn't have found out ourselves, and I didn't find it particularly actionable or insightful. That's all. I'm a little bit disappointed that you don't feel the same.
Yeah, I haven't got another answer for you, Nick.
Okay. Penny, would you like to come in?
If I may come in, and again, I need to stress for the panel that the presentation tonight was in agreement with the chair, that we would give an overview of the findings from the leisure needs assessment. That is not the full detailed report. Still in the process of finalising that detailed report. There's more work to be done. So it's a reflection of a point in time, not the output from the Commission. At the request of the committee, we wanted to make sure, and as Councillor Walters is stressing, that you sort of had the opportunity to have an oversight and be involved, you know, from the early stages of the process. But so just again to stress, that is a reflection of a point in time. The detailed report is still in the process of being finalised and has yet to be reviewed by the project board itself.
And that's fine, Penny. And all I'm trying to get across is I've only seen a snapshot of what that consultant has provided. So if you are confident that they will provide a more detailed and actionable report later date, I will go with that. But yeah, I can only reflect on what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the next stage is very much about that options appraisal and starting to identify what the actions are arising from that analysis that's been undertaken.
Councillor Oxley, would you like to come in? And I do have a question.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's pretty much what I was going to ask. But what I wanted to say was, and I did make this point at the pre-meeting. So this evening we are being asked to look at the Catmus Sports Centre, but the plan is for us to become more involved in how we are the offer of sport across the whole county. Is that correct? Am I right in saying that? So this is like a short term, but we're looking medium term and long term involvement in how we're going to build the offer to the wider community.
I'll take that one if I may. So yes, from the formal meeting tonight, you are helping Cabinet make its decision next week on the short-term option, and I presume that within that you are agreeing that we should not, in the first instance, spend £500,000 on the swimming pool in the short term. I make no comment on the long term. And personally, as the portfolio holder, I am asking in what way scrutiny would like to become more involved in helping us design the strategy for the medium and long term. I'm not saying I have the answer for that, because that's kind of up to you.
Well, coming back on that, I think we certainly need to have a meeting specifically devoted to this subject, because it's such a big subject. We can't really do it justice when we have 2 or 3 other agenda items to look at. I'm talking about the long-term view. And we also have the Rutland conversation ongoing, so hopefully we'll get some feedback from that, which we'll be able to look at. But I think we have to look at that from my own personal viewpoint, village halls and everything that is being offered across the whole county, because there's a lot going on. I mean, there are individuals who are organising power walks. I think we need to get a real handle on exactly what is being offered, and we need to get, and then we can perhaps signpost individuals to people who can help them take forward what they want to do. But it's not just about the offer of sports per se. It's the whole cultural offer across the whole county.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And that's why I asked for this to be added to my portfolio. So this should be about health and well-being and how we enable that through encouraging activity, which may or may not be formal sport and certainly may not include physical buildings and infrastructure.
If I could ask, it's well, more of an observation, I suppose. When we had the presentation, it actually said that there was 573 respondents for what they wanted our leisure facility to be in Rutland. I consider that to be very low out of a population of 37,000. I'm also very concerned that the younger population were not engaged in this at all. The percentage of younger people was very, very low. I know that the consultant said that we went out to 45 different stakeholders. I would like to know what stakeholders were actually involved that were of the younger generation. I'm very concerned that as a county, we are looking at facilities for the older generation, of which I appreciate I am one of them, but I think that we do need to provide facilities for our younger generation, especially school children. We're very fortunate in this county that we have a couple of really good private schools, but we also need to make sure that we have the facilities for those children that aren't wealthy enough to attend those schools. And I really do think that we need to make an effort to engage with those children and find out what facilities they need and look to provide that. That's my statement.
Yeah, I won't steal the leader's thunder because the Rutland conversation is very much led by Oliver. I think that's fair to say. Personally, I think 573 responses in regard to leisure is probably more than we've ever had, but that does not necessarily mean it's enough. And I certainly take your point about the demographics.
Councillor Oxley.
Yeah, very quickly, just on that point. When I was involved with the skateboard park in Uppingham, we actually asked all pupils at the UCC what they wanted, and they came back with a long list. The top of the list pretty much was a skateboard park in Uppingham. That was 15 years ago. And then we were able to go out and get funding from various sources in order to make it happen. And the children, the young people, the young adults now, felt involved, and they felt they took ownership of it and they took a pride in it. And it's not, and wonderfully, it was also that the pupils from Uppingham School, as well as young children of the town, mixed together. So I would urge as much involvement as possible from the young people in order to hear what they want. And I'm sure they have got very good ideas on how they can take it forward.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Councillor Ainsley.
Yeah, just very briefly. Mark, it'd be interesting to know that Councillor Harvey and myself are actually running with the Oakham Skate Park group at this very moment. So not much has changed in the last 15 years. That's a bit certainly. The other thing I wanted to say was I wholeheartedly support what Councillor Fox was saying regarding the youth involvement. I'm not at all certain that that has been. We'll know when Councillor Hemsley delivers his wonderful future running conversation statistics, but I suspect that perhaps they weren't as involved as we would like, and I'd certainly like that reassurance.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. It goes back to the needs analysis. I'm just becoming a little bit concerned. I understood from the presentation that we're going out for a needs analysis and of what's required to deliver health and well-being, the very point that Councillor Walters has made. We now seem to be using a lot of information from the Future Rutland conversation, and I was very concerned by the consultant saying, and I quote the words, what people would like to see. And if that's what we're now putting into this report, this no longer becomes a needs analysis, it becomes a, you know, this is what I'd like. And is that what we really want? I thought the whole point of this needs analysis was to find out what is absolutely required and then how we can deliver that either through the community or through a Rutland County Council or by other means. Maybe you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Gordon. We should make sure it is what people need. In terms of leisure pools, for example, I'm extremely aware that pretty much anyone can get to one within 20 minutes without us having to build one. But many people would say that, oh, we really ought to have a leisure pool in Rutland, and it should be in the middle of Rutland. I don't think that's something that we could ever justify. I won't predetermine it, but I don't think it is. So you're right. So I think on the other hand, there's quantitative analysis and there's qualitative as well, isn't there? So we shouldn't rule out what people say to us, but I do take your point that the vision mustn't be marred by unrealistic expectations.
Do we have any more questions at all?
I only want to know what the panel thinks we should do next week at Cabinet.
Is anybody going to answer that?
It strikes me that the conversation we've had, option 2 is really the only option that we have. That
I think Paul and I both stated we have no option. It has to be option 2.
Yeah.
Can we have a vote on that as who thinks option 2 is the best option, or whether we think there's another option to be put forward on the table?
It's also the point, Chairman, that we didn't necessarily have all the information that we needed, and we may not be in a position to give a steer. And clearly Councillor Walters has got a lot more of the background information about usage and types of people using it and so on than we've got.
Is there an option to actually defer the decision that's being made at Cabinet next week?
No, they'll close it down.
So if we go for option 2, how long are we actually committing ourselves for?
3 months.
Maximum of 2 years, open books, 3 months notice if we decide that we don't want to proceed with it.
3 months notice after 2 years?
We can give them 3 months notice, and my feeling is that if they do not accept that condition, then we do not proceed.
So can I just be, I'm a bit unclear here.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think what I heard Councillor Walters say and what I heard you say wasn't quite the same thing. The 3 months is 3 months from now, or 3 months after.
Let's get Penny to put the technical, because she's probably got it in front of her.
Yeah, so just to clarify that it's a maximum extension up to 2023, and throughout at any point in that period we can give a 3 month notice, so it in terms of what Cabinet would be agreeing on next week, it would be an up to 2023 decision, and that 3 months we could give at any point in that during that time.
And how much will we be committing ourselves to for over those 2 years, Penny?
So that's the figures in the report. That's the
Right, okay.
that's the cap. As based on that report, is that's what we've been asked to subsidize, underwrite, and I stress the underwrite. Going back to Councillor Beggy's earlier point, it will be on that open book process, and depending on how they perform, as hopefully we unlock and start to rebuild the usage of the centre.
So just to be clear, that's 43,000.
Well, it's we'd have to go into exempt, I think, in order to.
I don't think we've got anybody on. We've only got Sam, Joanna, and Robert Clayton on as attendees.
All right.
And
So
we
don't
can
have any
mention
members of the public.
and we can mention the figures that are in the public report. It's only Appendix A, isn't it, that's exempt?
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely.
Penny, did
The meeting is being recorded, so if we have to go into exempt, we should proper protocol as Joe would advise. Just because there's nobody listening tonight, there may be lots of people who want to listen after the event, of course.
oh, cool. Yeah, definitely. So to be clear, we only need to give them. So will we have any data from them over this next 2 years as to how many people are using the facility?
Yeah, because they've got to give us literally all of the open books, all of their accounts and their attendance.
So if we decide that there's not enough people using it and we're just flogging a dead horse, so to speak, or just propping up something that's throwing good money after bad, we can give 3 months notice and walk away.
If they accept those terms, I'm not sure, Penny, if you've put the terms to them and they've accepted them in principle.
Yes, they understand the principle.
Yeah.
Can
Nick,
I?
you have your hand up?
Oh, sorry, Nick.
Sorry,
You go first.
Mark.
I just want to take clarity, because this worries me. Have they agreed to this terms, or is there an apocalyptic position where we agree with option 2, they don't agree to the 3 months, and they end up closing it?
No.
Thank you.
And the point that I was going to ask was the last time that is the council, were asked to make the decision, it was made by full council. We actually had a debate about it, but I guess we don't have the time to do that if we're talking about the decision being made in August. So we don't.
The decision is made next week, Mark.
Yeah, but so full council will be asked to note that in a report at some time in the future.
It'll be a cabinet report to council, yes. So you'll be asked, yeah. It's unfortunate, it's short term, and we have to make a decision next week.
So asked by Councillor Waters, which option as GIR, our members tonight, would we advise to go? Which option do we think, given the information that we've been given on the table tonight?
Option 2. My eyes.
Gordon, are you putting your hand up, or? Yeah, would you like to speak? You're on mute.
I'd like to speak, just to say, I'd like to suggest that the GR committee, I'm going to say reluctantly supports. I think we are caught between a rock and a hard place at this point in time. So we reluctantly support this position, but that we ask that we have an early meeting of the GIR committee to look at some of the detail, and it would be an informal meeting, so we could discuss some of the more significant issues around the relationship with the school, etc., and what's been discussed with the school, plus the detail in terms of the numbers, the costs, etc., and what information has been asked for by Penny and her team and Robert and the team in terms of monthly reporting or whatever it might be, so we can understand how that's coming through and how that's going to be monitored.
Councillor Waller.
I'd like to second Gordon's proposal.
So can I have a vote on this, on who's in favour of this proposal, please? I think that's unanimous.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, Chair, that we minute Gordon's words of reluctantly accept?
Yes.
Please.
I've made a note of that, Councillor Beggy.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for that
moving on.
clarification.
Thank you
Give you
very
a chance
much.
of a
Penny.
comfort break before you move on, June.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Shall we just have 5 minutes just to get a
Sorry, Lucy.
break before Lucy comes in and does her bit? Right, I believe we're all back now. So if we go back to item 10, which is the waste strategy consultation document. This is a public consultation document that went live on Monday that we're now being asked to comment on. I will hand over to Councillor Stevenson. Are you presenting?
I am indeed. Thank you ever so much, Councillor Fox. Good evening, members. Good evening, officers. Right, if you remember, in November 2020, we took a council paper which approved extension of contracts to allow for a cohesive and coherent approach to reprocurement with a commonality of end dates being March 2024. Within that paper, we also approved the use of resource futures to undertake specialist work to ensure the best possible outcome for Rutland. In February 2021, Cabinet approved a paper to form a project board and the associated documents such as the PID, the project governance, including detail of when the scrutiny function would add the greatest value. Of course, they were Cabinet papers and in the public domain. To date, we have had monthly project board meetings, a couple of workshops with our consultants Resource Futures, including a very useful workshop today about the options appraisal work, looking at agreeing the options to be appraised in detail, including costings, use of the evidence we have, so for example, current tonnage rates. The project plan as presented in February is a live working document. It is reviewed at every board meeting and updated accordingly. So that's a little bit of background before I move into the summary document that you have before you this evening. This is about agreeing broad principles and to understand the context that we are working in. When I say we, I don't mean officers. Officers are clearly aware they're doing the work. You as members also are aware. I've already mentioned two papers that you have either approved with the council paper or certainly been aware of with the February paper. The we there, therefore, is the residents. We must go on this journey with the residents, hence that broad, high-level thinking, agreeing principles. So yes, on that front, obviously we provide a mandatory service, but, and I really do put that in capitals, resident support and view is absolutely crucial. It also hopefully is building on to the sort of principles of the Future Rutland conversation, whereby engagement, conversation, discussion, of course there will be questions, but it's just a slightly more proactive view, I think, on consultation in the most formal sense. So the context, incredibly crucial to get a collective understanding across the county. Firstly, waste and how we manage the change. It is clear there is a lot of change coming. Climate change itself, we've declared a climate crisis. We know that actually all of our policies, all of our activities need to bear that in mind. The environmental bill, we know that that's on the horizon. I'm pleased to say that there is a great deal more certainty around elements of it in terms of what we need to be delivering. The financial element, as ever with central government directives, that I suspect will be a slight battleground for Rutland, but more of that later. And of course, our own position in terms of our budget, hence one of the items in the PID referencing a 10% saving. And of course, the timely nature, our contracts were naturally coming to an end. We've obviously taken the sensible decision to end up with a coherent date, hence the extension. This is an opportunity to redesign, meeting the needs of our residents now and going forwards. The other thing to note with this document, and came out very strongly in the project board meeting, there is a need to be holistic. We need, this collective view needs to be on the principles of waste management, whether it be from inside our homes, on our travels around the county, or when we're having a domestic clear up. They all link back to that crucial waste hierarchy. Reduce in the first place, reuse where possible, recycle if you can't reuse, and as an absolute last resort, you end up throwing it away. Okay, and that is crucial, that waste hierarchy, and I have questions for scrutiny, which is perhaps a little unusual. Apologies, Chair, I may be overstepping the mark, but that is, I believe, a crucial part of the journey for our residents. As the Chair has mentioned, the summary is live online, and there is a brief set of survey questions, which I'm sure, well, you may have had opportunity to look at. Plenty of opportunity for free text, Resources Future, who are experts with extensive knowledge of many local authorities, with the good news stories, the things that didn't work so well. So they've played a crucial role in shaping those questions. And of course, the outcome from that will feed into the overall options appraisal work. So I'm going to finish there, Chair, but I am just going to ask 3 questions of scrutiny. I know scrutiny have plenty of questions to ask me, which I'll be very happy to answer. My first question, and I'd be grateful if members could comment on this, do you agree with the principles as outlined in the summary? Next really crucial thing, do you think this takes our residents on the journey that we are undertaking? And it is a journey, this is the start. When we've done that options appraisal work, we will be going back out to our community, but with the benefit that the community will have that broad baseline understanding of the challenges, the Rutland context, the national context, and of course the global context of climate change to base their answers and views on. The project board, this is my last question, the project board think that the next crucial stage of involvement for scrutiny is at the options appraisal stage, and I was just checking that there was agreement within the scrutiny panel for that. And at that point, Councillor Fox, I'm happy to answer questions. I have got Mrs. Sharp here if there are things that I believe are of a highly technical level and would benefit from some officer input, if that's acceptable.
Who would like to go first? Councillor Beggy.
Let's clarify one thing, Lucy. I can't disagree with all of the consultation that you're looking to take on board and bring the community with us, etc., etc., etc. Can you just clarify what the timelines are and whether or not this work could be carried out in time to come to a conclusion before we have to extend contracts further?
Right, so obviously, if you like, the drop dead date is that the overall aim is that we are starting our new contracts in April 2024. We are working on the options appraisal literally sort of for June, and then I believe, I'm looking at Mrs. Sharp just to correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that we'll obviously then be coming to scrutiny July time and the public sort of July, August time, with a final proposal, I think due for September. Do feel free to disagree with me, Mrs. Sharp. I haven't got the PID right in front of me.
Sorry, yes, that's correct in terms of broad timescales. In terms of, so the project plan, and again, I think I'm happy as with the leisure one to circulate the project plan as it stands at the moment, if members would find that helpful. But that takes us through the systematic process to get us to the re-procurement by 2024. And at this time, although there's been a sort of a shift in the way that we've moved around some of the tasks in the process, but we are still on track with those key milestones.
I think it was Councillor Oxley. Sorry if I've got it the wrong way around.
I just wanted clarification on the year, because Lucy said July and August. What year are you talking about, the appraisal?
I'm so sorry, Councillor Oxley. This year, 2020. Thank you. Which year am I in? 2021. Good grief. Sorry, Councillor Oxley. I didn't think I'd get caught on the hop with the year.
So we're talking about the July and August 2021 to look at the options appraisal prior to, okay, so this meeting is just to look at the consultation document.
Yeah, and this is the broad overreaching summary, because I think, you know, I mean, not just with waste, we are at a watershed moment in how we organise society, as we know from the Future Rutland conversation. Agreeing broad principles is absolutely essential, because you need to know what your ambition is, you need to know where you're heading, the detail of how you get there comes out, to use a colloquialism, it comes out in the wash, hence that appraisals options appraisals work.
Because when we had the pre-meeting discussion on this, one thing came over very clear, and that was we don't really know what government is asking of us. We don't, with regards to the Environment Bill, it's still up in the air. So there was some confusion as to how we were going to be able to make a decision without the use of a magic wand in order to be able to see exactly what's coming in the future.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Councillor Oxley. And dare I say it, I think we've had quite a lot of practice with the pandemic, with government announcements and then guidelines appearing somewhat in a tardy fashion. What I gathered today, and again, Mrs. Sharp was in the meeting, we will definitely need to have a separate food waste collection. There are some authorities who are currently mixing green and food waste together. That isn't the best option in terms of climate change. And my Resources Future, who I'm very confident in, felt that it would be unlikely that we would be allowed to do that, and I'm not sure it's the best option. The debate, I guess, will be around whether we continue with our mixed recyclables. There are various options around that, but there are things that are, you know, that are very, very clear within the environmental bill. The detail and how we interpret them, as ever with any government bill, will be up for grabs. And I think having a really thorough approach to this options appraisal means that we've done half the work with that, because anything we're presenting to government, we know is based in evidence and has been really thoroughly extrapolated. Did you want to add anything else, Mrs. Sharp?
Sorry, just trying to get off mute. Just to say that the Environment Bill is currently going through Parliament at the moment, had its second reading earlier in the week. So we are getting sort of greater certainty in terms of what we anticipate will be included in terms of the requirements and need to plan accordingly. I think one of the biggest challenges actually with the Environment Bill is the expectation that local authorities will all need to do, or the risk, I suppose, is that local authorities will all need to move and respond at the same time, and we need to make sure that we're on the front foot in terms of being able to mobilise in response to that bill.
Supplementary very quickly, the problem is that at the moment we are not recycling food waste, and so we will have to do an enormous amount of work in order to educate, if you like, the people of Rutland as to the huge sea change that is going to come about with asking them to also separate their food waste from their recyclables and everything else. So it's a big job, a big ask we have to make of the people of Rutland.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Councillor Oxley. It's a big ask, but it's a must do. It was a big ask to lock down. It was a big ask to wear masks. This is, you know, it's something that we need to do, and we'll get on and do it. Part of that journey, as I said, with this summary document, is taking our residents on that journey with us. And that's the crucial thing with this summary document, being readable, not getting caught up too much in jargon, but really just beginning that sort of drip, drip, drip effect. And so hopefully, Councillor Oxley, together, we'll head in the right direction.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will attempt to answer Councillor Stevenson's questions, although I do have a few comments and questions on the actual paper itself. Do we agree with the principles? Well, frankly, no. I think our overriding principle at the moment has got to be do what we have to do at the cheapest possible price, is my thought. And that ought to then make it possible for us to do other things, because we will create money to do other things with. But there we are, you asked me and I'm telling you.
Am I allowed to come back on that at this point, or would you like me to wait until you've said everything?
Finish my 3, please, Lucy. My second is, will it take the community with us? Well, I suspect not, because we do actually have a fairly high recycle rate in Rutland, not as high as we might want, but we do have a fairly high one. So what we're trying to do is, or need to do, is to get the people who don't recycle, or the people like my husband, and I'm forever taking things out of the black bin and putting it in the recycle bin. Now, it's not he doesn't know, and it's not that he's not been exposed, it's that he can't be asked, to use that horrible expression. So you've got to appeal to people who aren't currently doing it. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is to look to get them to focus on their pockets. If we continue spending money at the rate we have, we are going to have to put up the council tax. That sort of approach, I think we need to be a lot more blunt about. Again, you know, it's just a view. And as regards your third point about the options appraisal, yes, clearly we would, as a committee, I'm sure, want to be involved in that, which was the question you asked. But in terms of this specific paper, a couple of actual observations on it. Paragraph 6.2 about the household waste recycling centres. I haven't got a sense as to why we would want to change what we've currently got. I don't mean that as a councillor, I mean that as a resident. I would have wanted some, it is costing us so much to provide 2. It might cost us less to provide 1. We could perhaps only provide 1 if it was in a better location, because obviously the 2 we've got are at the extremes. You know, that's sort of why you're asking the question, I think doesn't come out terribly well in that. And in 6.4, dog fouling, I think it's the one issue that comes up in parish councils regularly more than any other issue. And it doesn't seem to matter how many little bags they put out next to the bins, how many notices they put around the villages, people still let their dogs foul and leave it. And we have noticed since lockdown, and more people are at home, certainly in 2 of the villages in my ward, that it's actually not village residents who are doing it, it's people who've come in to walk their dogs in our area. So I'm not sure that awareness raising is the answer on that one. I think a few more prosecutions and getting that message out might be the answer. That's just an observation of, after 12 years of hearing about dog fouling. I don't have a dog, and that's one of the reasons I would not get a dog. A bit of levity in the business. Those were my comments on the actual, or no, one more comment on the actual paper. Do we know how much additional waste has been generated / collected in the last year as a result of increased online shopping? Because I suspect that online shopping is not going to decrease anytime soon. Because I think that's an important factor.
Oh, thank you ever so much, Councillor Waller, and thank you for answering my questions, which I've actually jotted down the notes. In terms of the cost at the centre, it should be the cheapest. I think affordability is crucial. What I would say, though, is that cost sometimes isn't just fiscal. We as a society consume too much. It is no longer sustainable for this planet. So the environmental cost also, for me, I am placing that with with the fiscal cost. Just to reassure you though, Councillor Waller, in terms of the appraisal options, there will be weightings placed on those considerations. So how much of a weighting do we give to the cost? How much of a weighting do we give to the climate change, etc., etc. So I know that my view is disagreed with by quite a few people in this Zoom meeting. I'm merely giving my view. In terms of the residents, yeah, council tax always crops up. Anything that I deal with in my portfolio, I should get X, Y, and Z. That to me is a completely different argument, which sounds very odd. That's an argument about taxation, whether people should be taxed that will pay for things that they fundamentally don't receive. So for anybody without children at school, you could follow that argument. So I understand that, and I've noted it, Councillor Waller. I do think there's a bit more nuance around that. I'm glad you agree with the project board options appraisal. That was my personal view. Thank you for the comments about the HWRC sites. I'll be very interested to see what comes back from residents on that one when we've completed the consultation period. And I think, again, that point is noted, and we'll sort of extrapolate that little more. Dog fouling, yeah, complete pain. Apparently I'm not allowed the stocks for people who don't clear up people's dogs. That was a joke, everybody, I'm not that awful. I'm inclined to agree with you with awareness training, but I think if you stop trying, then that's the point, it gets an awful lot worse. So yeah, I think that's a sort of uphill struggle, but a struggle we must have, because as you rightly point out, it crops up at every parish meeting, regularly on social media, etc. In terms of the additional waste from last year, I know we keep very careful records of the tonnage. I will have to ask Mrs. Sharp if we know that we could narrow down. No, I didn't think we could narrow down to the online shopping, but I have made a note of that, because I think, again, that's about the choices we make as residents. If we do all our shopping online, actually, we might be keeping our car off the road, but we've increased delivery trucks on our narrow country lanes, and we have increased the tonnage of the waste that needs to be dealt with. So perhaps residents might then like to consider whether or not they're shopping more locally and taking their own bags. So I think it's an excellent point. Thank you, Councillor Waller.
Councillor Brown, you have your hands up.
Yes, I do, Chair. Can I start off very much the same way that we started off the ledger discussions, and that is that scrutiny asked for information from the officers and the cap portfolio holder following our meeting a couple of months ago. Nothing has been forthcoming, and we only got this document on Monday. It clearly was available long before that. It made it very difficult. It was being touted long before that. It was in the document a week before it, at least. So I'm disappointed we didn't have more time, and therefore more time to give you a chance to look at the questions. I am also concerned that we appear to be being told when scrutiny can look at information, and it seems to be after the fact rather than before the fact. You can look at the options once we've decided what the options are. You can look at the strategy once we've decided what the strategy document looks like. You can look at something once we've decided. Is that the role of scrutiny, really? I'm sure when you were a scrutiny chair, Councillor Stevenson, that wasn't the way you worked. Therefore, I would ask, can you share the presentation you had today from the consultants on the options panel, so we can look at it and start to understand your direction of travel in more detail? So that's my first question. Next question is, looking at the document itself, I think the goals are all very laudable, but I think the concern I have is they lack detail. And as a resident, I would look at them and go, well, yeah, very nice, but what are you telling me? What's the implications to me of these goals that you're setting out? What are the implications of it? What's going to happen to me as a resident? It's very high level. In fact, I'd go to say it's not a strategy. It's not even a vision document at this stage. It's sort of vision document. It's definitely not a strategy. as I would understand a strategy. And therefore, I'm questioning what you're really trying to get back from people, because you're not really giving them both sides of the question. You're giving the question or the information in terms of this is what we're thinking. You're not saying what that implication might be. So that's really one of the fundamental problems I've got with it. Why include street scene in this at this point in time? It's in there, but it's paragraph 6.4. Should this really be part of this document? Is street scene part of it? Yes, I understand it may be part of the contract, maybe part of a contract that we have with a potential bidder or bidders in the future. But is there an opportunity, particularly because a lot of the street scene costs are incurred in Uppingham and Oakham, which is a double taxation for residents outside those areas, that we should be looking to the town councils to start looking to pick up these costs, and not for the county council to be picking them up. And this doesn't appear to be addressed in this particular document, or even questioned in that document. It's an ideal opportunity to do that. Deposit return scheme. It's all very well saying that we want to be up to 65% by 2035. But what happens when all the deposit return scheme works and all the bottles and plastic bottles and glass bottles are returned to Tesco or Aldi or Lidl or whatever it might be? They don't come through our recycling bins, and our recycling decreases in an overall proportion. What's the impact of that? Is food, once we take food out separately, is that seen as a recyclable? Is that part of recycling or not? Because we already get energy from waste from our food. What we're going to do is change that to gas from waste. So what's the measurement that's happening there? There's a lot of questions that are out there that are not really being addressed in any of these documents, or for that matter, being asked of the scrutiny panel. I really would like to see scrutiny taking a more early role in it rather than after role. And I think that's exactly what scrutiny asked of you when we had our meeting 3 months ago. And I'm disappointed that all we've got is a strategy document, which is a vision, really.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Right, I shall start at the top and then work down until I finish. So scrutiny asks for information. Could I just clarify, because I think you've had the summary. I am mindful, though, that scrutiny, and again, sorry, Chair, you may have a very different view of this. I think that's a very broad discussion about the function of scrutiny. This is about taking residents along on the journey with us. And so therefore, that's what we're working on. In terms of the document before you, it didn't get to desktop publishing until Monday. That was because we wanted it to be as right as possible. So I would hope scrutiny would appreciate that we're not going to rush things out to meet a scrutiny deadline. We're going to get things done well and right for what is needed for the council. And the second thing, Councillor Brown, we are a cabinet system. What you described there is actually designing by committee, with respect. Obviously, you've been both on both sides there, but we are operating a cabinet system whereby cabinet will do the work. In this case, we're doing it as a project board, and the role of scrutiny is obviously acknowledged as being very important, and that is reflected in that gateway document, the governance document of this project. And of course, actually my third question introducing this. Moving on to so I think that will be I think that's probably an agree to disagree. I have, however, noted your request with regard to seeing the slides, but I am mindful that we become designing by committee. On to the specific things to do with the report, the goals, and you referenced that residents would want X, Y, and Z. Dare I suggest, Councillor Brown, I don't count you as our average resident. From my experience with highways, actually in terms of explaining, not explaining, sorry, that sounds patronising and I don't mean it to be. I think we can't underestimate, you're the ex-portfolio holder for this particular service. All the members have had that full council paper. So actually you're bringing an awful lot of knowledge and understanding. So when you read that document, I think that you possibly would be reading it from that perspective. I am aiming, and I am being ambitious, I want to get all residents involved, because actually there's an element of duty here. All residents produce rubbish. All residents need to come on the journey with this. The questions, and I apologise you haven't had time to look at them, there's lots of space for free text answers. So it may well be that residents like yourself will come back and say, well, how can you possibly expect me to comment? I need to know the costs. The costs are really, really important. Equally, I might have residents coming back saying, really pleased to see this. I'm really passionate about climate change. I'm appalled, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's a case of we'll see what comes back. We will be reflective. It is there to inform the ongoing process. So nothing is set in stone. In terms of the street scene, I'm inclined to agree with you, and I'm certainly happy for us to be discussing that. This isn't a final iteration. This is the start of the journey. So it might be that we say, okay, part of that street scene commitment, emptying the bins, will need to be in the new contract. However, how we approach open spaces, that actually benefits from a separate strategy. It's got all sorts of things coming into that, how we manage our verges, what we expect of people, what people expect of their environment, back to Councillor Waller's dog fouling. So I think that very happy to have that conversation, discussion. Ultimately, we need something that's right for Rutland, not just right for Rutland for the next couple of years, right for Rutland in these 10 years, but actually forward thinking for the next 50. So all of this is part of a massive jigsaw for me. And then the last bit, in terms of the deposit scheme, yeah, you're right, that might have a massive impact. That's where we need to constantly build in reflection to what we deliver. And actually, I would assume that the government also would be keeping track of that. And so therefore, at some point, we are going to have to put a marker in the sand. We are going to have to work towards it. And sometimes we may well have to tweak things. That's life and that's normal. My understanding is specifically, and I'm looking at Mrs. Sharp for a nod or a shake of the head, I believe that the food would be counted within our recycling rates. And I think I've covered everything, Councillor Brown. I suspect you'll come back.
We obviously have a different opinion in terms of what the role of scrutiny is, and I think there's a discussion to be had there in due course. Coming back to that final point you made, I struggle to see the difference between energy from waste and gas from waste that gives you energy, and therefore the need for anaerobic digesters. So I think I'll leave it hanging there. It's not an answer you can give tonight, but I just question it, because I think, you know, it's going to put us to a lot of cost if we're not very careful. And, you know, do we really need to do it? When do we really need to do it? I mean, there's a whole series of questions that I feel that